Hello and welcome back to another full step-by-step PC build guide, and today I'm going to show you how to build a PC in the latest case from Raidmax. This is the X603. The white version that I have here will cost you just less than 110 US dollars. There is also a black version for just under 100 US dollars. So let's take a look at the other parts I'm going to be building with today. For the motherboard, I'm going to be using ASRock's B650E Steel Legend Wi-Fi. For our CPU, I'm going to be using AMD's Ryzen 9, the 7900X. Keeping our CPU cool, I've got a 360mm AIO from Raidmax. It's the Infinita LS360 in white. For RAM, I've got 32GB of Kingston Fury Renegade DDR5 in white and a blistering fast 7200 megatransfers per second. For storage, I'm going with a single Gen 4 NVMe M.2 drive for this build. It's from ADATA and it's their Legend 960 in 1TB capacity. Powering the whole build, I've got an 850W fully modular ATX 3.0 power supply from Cooler Master. It's the V850i Gold Multi. For the graphics card, I'm going to be using NVIDIA's brand new RTX 4070 Foundry Edition. And for case fans, I'm going to be using Lian's AL120 V2 Uni fans in black. Okay, that's all the parts, let's build. To remove our tempered glass side panel, we've got two non-captive thumb screws on the back that we need to remove. And once these have been removed, the side panel can be slid backwards, tilted out and lifted away. Just before we remove our other side panel, you'll notice we've got this perforated area indicating that we're going to be able to side mount fans and radiators in the case. This panel is removed in exactly the same way. At the back of the case, we've got two non-captive thumb screws which we need to remove. And then we can slide the panel backwards and lift away. Taking a look at our case's front I/O, we've got a power and reset button, we've got two USB Type A ports, a single Type C port, a combined headphone and microphone jack, and then a button to control the case's built-in RGB controller. On the top of the case, we've got a magnetically attached dust filter with the Raidmax logo, which can simply be pulled away. The case's front panel can simply be pulled away from the front. If we take a look at the back of the panel we just removed, you'll notice that there's no separate dust filter and we've just got mesh on the front, although the holes in the mesh are fairly fine. With the front panel removed, you can see we've got three 120mm fans pre-installed at the front. These fans do have ARGB on them, and they've got a 3-pin fan connector that you're going to have to run in DC mode. If you prefer at the front, you can fit up to three 140mm fans, or up to a 360 or 280mm radiator. At the top of the case, it's up to three 120mm fans or two 140mm fans, or up to a 360 or 280mm radiator. At the rear of the case is up to a 120mm fan or radiator, and we've got another 120mm ARGB fan pre-installed. On the power supply side, we're going to be able to mount up to two 120mm fans. The idea is you're going to set your fans into place, and then you're going to use the same screws you would use to secure a fan to a radiator to go down into the holes in the bottom of the case. The screws that you're going to need to secure the fans to the case aren't included, but they are just standard radiator screws. The other important thing to point out, the holes in the bottom of the case are designed to have a slight gap between the two fans. So this is where the two Lian Uni fans are going to sit. So Lian Uni fans aren't going to work in this case because obviously the two fans need to be joined together. And if you join them together, they're not going to line up with the holes in the bottom of the case. We're also going to be able to mount two 120mm fans or a 240mm radiator on the side of the case. We've got a dust filter in place if you're not actually going to be mounting fans. If you are, you can simply remove the dust filter. In terms of motherboard support, it's up to eATX, and if you want to go with a CPU air cooler, the maximum height supported is up to 165mm. At the rear of the case, we've got 7 horizontal PCI expansion slots, although unfortunately these are the breakaway type. And in terms of graphics card support, you're going to be able to fit a fairly large graphics card in the case, up to a maximum length of 400mm. And if we take a look down the bottom of the case, you'll notice we've got a cutout where our power supply is going to be on display. So factor this in when you're picking your power supply. Make sure what's going to be showing here is actually going to look good on your power supply. We've got a dust filter over our power supply's intake, although if we pull it out, you'll see it's just simply a sheet of mesh. Taking a look at our rear compartment, it's good to see we've got plenty of cutouts through to the main body of the case, although unfortunately none of these have any rubber grommets on them. At the top of the case, we can see our ARGB hub and our 4 pre-installed fans are already plugged into it, and we've got 2 spare spaces for additional devices. You can see here we've got our LED control switch plugged in, so we're going to be able to press the button on the front of the case to cycle through the various ARGB effects. And importantly, we've also got an ARGB cable coming from the controller, so we're going to be able to plug this into our motherboard and get motherboard control. In terms of drive mounting locations, we've got 2 dedicated 2.5-inch drive mounts here behind the motherboard, And we've got these rubber grommets here. You're going to screw little pegs into the back of your 2.5-inch drive and then simply slot them into place, which is definitely one of my favourite ways of mounting 2.5-inch drives. Our case accessory box is in the hard drive cage at the bottom of the case. And our hard drive cage is movable and removable. We've got a little thumb screw here at the front we need to remove. And with this removed, then we need to pull the hard drive cage towards us to free it up, and then it can be lifted away. There's also the option to move the hard drive cage further forward. We can slide it forward, push it into place, and then if we want to keep the hard drive cage here, we can put the thumb screw into place. I'm not planning on installing any hard drives in this case, so I'm going to go ahead and remove the hard drive cage. In the hard drive cage, we're going to be able to mount one 3.5-inch drive, while on top of the hard drive cage, we can either mount a 3.5-inch or 2.5-inch drive. To open our socket cover, we need to push this lever down and out and then bring it towards the middle of the motherboard, and then we're going to be able to open the socket cover up. We can then set our CPU down into the socket, line it up with the notches at the top and at the bottom. Once we're happy it's in the right place by giving it a little wiggle from side to side, we can go ahead and close the socket cover down again. Then it's just a matter of closing the lever down. As we do, this black bit of plastic will pop off, and then we're going to be able to lift it up and put it into our motherboard box for safekeeping. Next, we're ready to install our M.2 SSD, and we're going to remove the heatsink, which is held on with 2 screws. We can then set our M.2 SSD drive into place, putting it into the socket, and then you'll notice when we flatten it down, the same screw, which is going to hold our heatsink in place, is also going to hold our drive in place. Now, if you're using the motherboard from new, you'll have some plastic protection on the back of the heatsink, which you're going to need to remove. I've used this motherboard before, which is why it's already removed. Because we've got 2 sticks of RAM, we're going to install it in the 2nd and 4th slot along from the CPU. So we just need to open the clips on these slots. Then we can line our RAM up with the slot. Once we're happy we've got everything lined up, it's just some firm pressure to the RAM and it's going to clip into place. Same thing with our 2nd stick, line it up with a slot, and once we're happy everything's lined up, some firm pressure, and it's going to clip into place. We can then set the motherboard into the case, line it up with the standoffs at the back. And you notice that once we get the middle standoff in place, it's going to help hold the motherboard. Then we're going to use 9 screws with a little lip around the outside to secure the motherboard to the case. Next thing to do is get our case cables plugged in, starting off with our HD audio cable, which is going to go into this header down the bottom left-hand side of the motherboard. So you can bring the cable through the cutout, line it up with the header, making sure we've got the cable the correct way round, and push into place, and then pull the excess cable through to the back. 2 headers along, we've got one of this motherboard's 3 ARGB headers, so we'll bring the ARGB cable coming from our case's controller through and push into place, and again pull the excess cable through to the back. In the middle of the motherboard we've got 2 system fan headers, so we'll bring the cable coming from our rear fan through, line it up with the motherboard and push into place. Our 3 front fans are already plugged into a triple splitter cable, so we'll bring the end of that cable through, line it up with the motherboard and push into place, and again pull the excess cable through to the back. Next we've got our front panel connectors, which are going to go into this header here. It is important to follow the diagram in the motherboard manual so you're getting all these cables plugged into the right pins on the header. So starting off with the bottom row, into pins 1 and 2 we've got hard drive LED positive and hard drive LED negative, so we are going to have to plug this cable in with the text facing down the way. Next into pins 3 and 4 in the bottom row we've got our reset switch. It doesn't matter which way it goes, I'm just going to plug it in with the text facing down the way. Moving up to the top row we've got power LED positive and power LED negative into pins 1 and 2 from the left hand side, and then next to that into pins 3 and 4 we've got our power switch. Again, it doesn't matter which way it goes, I'm just going to plug it in with the text facing down the way, and then we can pull all the excess cable through to the back. Our USB 3.0 cable is going to go into this header here, so we'll bring it through the cutout, line it up with the header and push into place, and then again pull the excess cable through to the back. Just below this we've got our Type-C header, so again bringing the cable through the cutout, line it up with the header and pushing into place, and again pulling the excess cable through to the back. We're now ready to install our power supply, and I've gone ahead and plugged in the cables that we're going to need. So I plugged in a 24-pin cable, our 12-volt high power cable for our graphics card, 2 8-pin EPS cables to provide additional power to our CPU, and I've also plugged in a SATA power cable. The reason for that is our case's ARGB controller is going to need SATA power. This is also a smart power supply, so it has a USB cable which allows the power supply to communicate with the motherboard, so I've also plugged it in as well. This is our power supply's intake fan. We're going to want to install it facing down the way so we can get fresh air from the bottom of the case. So it's just a matter of sliding the power supply into place and then all the way to the back. And then we can screw the power supply into place with 4 of the larger screws from the case accessory box. Our 2 8-pin EPS cables are going to go into these headers at the top left of the motherboard, so we can bring the cables through the cutout, line them up with the header and push into place. And then we can pull the excess cables through to the back. Our 24-pin cable is going to go into this header here, so we'll bring it in through the cutout, line it up with the header and push into place. And then again, pull the excess cable through to the back. We've got 2 USB 2.0 headers down at the bottom of the motherboard, so I'm going to bring the cable through the cutout, and because there is a pin missing on the header and a hole missing on the cable, we're going to need to plug it in with the USB text facing up the way. And then again, we'll pull the excess cable through to the back. Then we just need to plug the SATA cable coming from our case into the SATA cable coming from our power supply. Next thing to do is install our case fans. So we're going to join our 2 Lian Uni fans together by setting them on top of each other and then pushing into place. Now importantly, the fans on the side we're going to want to have set to intake. It wouldn't make sense to have them set to exhaust because they'd just be exhausting all the cool air that was coming in from the front of the case. So this is the back of the fan, so this will be having them set as intake. If we installed them this way around, they would be set to exhaust. So it's this way that we're going to want to have them. As we're not adding any more fans at the top, the little connectors at the top we can simply twist round to remove. Then on the other end of the fans, we're going to need to plug in our cable. It's just a matter of lining the cable up and pushing into place. And this is the cable that comes with a single pack of fans. So on the end, we've got a single 4-pin PWM connector, and we've then got this little ARGB connector, which we can then plug into an ARGB header on our motherboard. So we can set our fans into place at the side of the case, set to intake, and then we can get the fans screwed into place at the back with the screws that came with the fans. The next thing to do is decide how we're going to handle the dust filtration at the back of the case. The included dust filter is a little bit short to cover all the holes here. You can see with it on, there's still gaps at the top and at the bottom. So I'm assuming Raidmax want us to set the dust filter directly on behind the fans, which we'll do by sliding up here. Just making sure all the fan cables are out of the way. And there we go. And then just bring the cables coming from the fans through to the back of the case. And then at the top of the motherboard, we've got 2 ARGB headers. So we'll bring the cable back in, line it up with one of the ARGB headers and push into place, and then pull the excess cable through to the back. We've got another system fan header here. So we'll bring our PWM cable coming from the fans through, line it up with a header, push into place, and then pull the excess cable through to the back. We're now ready to work on the I/O, and the first thing to do is get our fans set into place. So when we install it, this is going to be the back, so I'm going to have the cables coming out towards the back. And then we're going to use the long radiator screws to secure the fans to the radiator. Next thing to do is take a look at the cables coming from the fans. So from each of the fans, we've got 2 cables. The first is a 4-pin PWM connector. And in the kit with the I/O, we get this triple splitter cable. So it's just a matter of plugging each of the fans into the triple splitter cable. So that's just going to leave us one 4-pin PWM connector to plug into the CPU fan header on our motherboard. The other cable is an ARGB connector, and it's just simply a matter of daisy chaining all these connectors together. So this is just going to leave us one ARGB connector, and then coming from our pump, we've got another header we can plug into, which again is just going to give us the one ARGB connector left. Now in the kit with the I/O, we get an adapter, which we can plug into here. And then that is going to give us a single 3-pin 5V ARGB connector to plug either into our motherboard, or we can actually plug this into the ARGB controller on our case. The only other cable that we're going to have to plug in is, if we take a look at our pump, we've got this 3-pin fan connector, and we're going to plug this into the pump header on the motherboard. Now, to make things a little bit easier, what I'm going to do is unplug the RGB cable from the pump, and it's just going to make installation that bit easier, and then we'll connect it up again once we've installed things in the case. The next thing for us to do is install the brackets that's going to allow us to secure the pump to the motherboard. So this little bracket sits on here. And then we're going to take the screws that come with the I/O and set them through here and screw them into the bracket. And then same thing on the other side, set the bracket into place. Then we've got another little bit of the bracket to slot in under here and a thumb screw to go on top. And we're just going to put the thumb screw on very loosely. And then exactly the same thing on the other side. We can then set our I/O into the case, and then we can get things secured into place at the top with the short radiator screws. We can then replace the top dust filter. I'm going to pass all the cables coming from the fans and the I/O through to the back of the case. Next, we can add some thermal paste to the center of the CPU. It is included with the cooler. So just sizing things up with the bracket on the motherboard, and I've realized these clips are round the wrong way. It's meant to be towards the inside of the cooler. So all I'm going to do is loosen up the thumb screw, turn the bracket round, and pop the thumb screw back on. And then the same thing at the bottom. So there you go, that's the way it's meant to be, with the little clips in towards the middle of the cooler. I'm then going to be able to take the cooler and put the top clip over the bracket, and then try and get the bottom one over the bracket at the bottom. There we go, that's both clips on. And then all we need to do is tighten up the thumb screws. And then we'll just give it a couple of turns with a screwdriver. I'm just going to route the cables up towards the top of the motherboard. I'm going to pass the RGB cable through to the back. And we've got two CPU fan headers at the top of the motherboard. The one to the right is the CPU fan header. The one to the left is the pump header. So we're going to take the 3-pin connector coming from our pump and get it plugged into the header. And then we'll just route the excess cable through to the back. I'm then going to bring the PWM cable coming from our splitter cable where the fans on the radiator are plugged into. Line it up with the CPU fan header, push into place, and then pull the excess cable through to the back. And we can then remove the plastic protection from the I/O. At the back of the case then we can plug the ARGB cable into the cable coming from the pump. And then the daisy chainable connector, we're going to plug the cables coming from the fans into here. All we're then going to need to do is plug in our ARGB cable into one of the 3 ports on our ARGB controller. We are now ready to install our graphics card, so we're going to have to loosen this thumb screw to remove the cover out of the way. And it's the 2nd and 3rd slot cover from the top that we're going to need to remove. And these are the breakaway type, so just a matter of applying a little bit of pressure here and then wiggling this up and down until it falls off. And then same again with the slot below. Next, we can open the top PCIe slot on the motherboard. Then it's just a matter of lining our graphics card up with the slot. And once we're happy everything's lined up, it's just some firm pressure to the graphics card and it's going to clip into place. And then we can secure the graphics card into place at the side with the same 2 screws we used to secure the motherboard to the case. And then we can slide the cover back into place and tighten up the thumb screw. We can then bring our 12-volt high power cable through the cutout at the bottom, line things up with the graphics card and push into place, making sure we get a nice satisfying click. And then again, we'll just pull the excess cable through to the back. Okay, last thing to do is some cable management. So that's the build complete, and I'm fairly happy with how it turned out. I think it's a pretty good looking PC. If you don't know how to install Windows, the drivers, adjust the RGB software, enter the BIOS, update the BIOS, and adjust the BIOS settings, I've made another video where I cover all that, and I'll put a link to that video in the description. In terms of using the case's built-in ARGB controller, it's just a simple matter of pressing the button on the top of the case to cycle through the case's various ARGB effects, and provided you plugged in the ARGB cable coming from the controller into the motherboard, to sync up with the motherboard, all you need to do is hold the button in. It will flash and then sync up to whatever you've set to the motherboard. In this case, I've got it set to static white. So I have done some thermal testing, and I'll throw the results up on the screen. So as you can see, our 7900X is a fairly difficult CPU to cool, and our GPU temperatures and noise levels are also fairly acceptable. So now what I want to do is share my thoughts on the case, because I'm not planning on making a separate case review. So the things I liked about the case in general, I think it's a really good looking case, and particularly I really like the front panel. It's also good that it comes with 4 ARGB fans included and a built-in ARGB hub. It's also a fairly easy case to build in. I didn't run into any difficulties at all. I had no problem reaching the ports on the top of the motherboard with the I/O installed at the top. And in terms of cable management, it was also pretty good. Although it is important to say I didn't use cable extensions. So I don't know with cable extensions at the back how easy the cable management would have been. But I think you're going to be okay in the case. So now I want to come on to the things I didn't like about the case, and there definitely was a few of these given this case is at a price point at $110 for the white version that I've got here. And a lot of these features I would expect to find in a more budget oriented case, but maybe not a case at $110. So the first thing was the thumb screws securing both the side panels were non-captive and had to be fully removed. The second is the breakaway style PCIe slots. I absolutely hate these. In terms of the fans in the case, great to see we've got 4 ARGB fans, but slightly disappointed at the fact that they had 3-pin connectors, so you're not going to be able to run them in PWM mode. Again, the fans on the side of the case, I have some mixed feelings on them. I think once you install fans here, it actually does look pretty good, but the fact as standard the case comes with only the fans at the front and at the rear, and no fans on the side, I don't think the dust filter on the side is going to look very good, particularly when you've got the cables at the back of the case and you're going to potentially see them through the dust filter. So I think really that the case should come with side fans, and I think it would be nice to see reverse fans on the side, because you are going to want to have those fans on the side set to intake. Another issue with this case was the fact that there was no rubber grommets. And in particular, I think you did need rubber grommets over the 2 large cutouts to the right-hand side of the motherboard, because it is possible to see a lot of your cables poking through those cutouts. And then the final thing to mention was the fan mounting slots down at the bottom of the case. Certainly with a small graphics card like this RTX 4070, there would be space for 2 120mm fans at the bottom. 2 slight disappointing things with this though. The first is that the screws to secure the fans to the bottom of the case aren't included, and the second for me is that there is a slight gap between the 2 fans, so Lian Li Uni fans weren't going to work. So summing up my thoughts on this case, at $110, I do think it is a little bit expensive given some of the shortcomings that I have mentioned. Although, all in all, I do think I've come up with a pretty good looking build in the case, so you should be able to do something similar. And if you are able to find this case on offer for around about $70 to $80, which I really think is what it should be selling for, I think you can come up with a build that you're going to be fairly happy with. So hopefully you have enjoyed this full step-by-step build guide. If you have, please remember to give me a thumbs up, drop me a comment, and hit the subscribe button. And I'll see you in the next video.